Buenas tardes a todos.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the second plenary of the Summit of Public Development Banks Fixed 2023 under the topic Latin America and the Caribbean Vision 2030-2050. From the center of the region, Cartagena, we are meeting to understand a shared vision to have a better future for people in these countries. In spite of social and economic challenges, Latin America and the Caribbean are accepting their role and as active participating region in global challenges. And the public banks, public development banks, are the catalyzers to promote a sustainable growth. Before starting, we want to greet all those that are present, also those that are virtually connected to this session, which is divided in two parts. The speech of our keynote speaker and a discussion with an expert panel. We invite you to share your thoughts about this conversation in the social media using the hashtag FinancingCommon2023 and to follow our Twitter and LinkedIn accounts at FinancingCommon to keep updated. So to start this afternoon, I want to welcome especially our keynote speaker, Héctor Abad Faciolince. So a round of applause for him, a Colombian writer and journalist. He has been awarded the Latin America Award in Portugal and Wola Duke Award in Human Rights, also two Simón Bolívar Journalism awards, and he will give a conference about is there Latin America between the real and the imaginary. Welcome. Well, good afternoon. Thank you for allowing me to address myself to a distinguished public. I want to thank Javier Diaz mainly for having the risk of inviting me, taking this risk. On commercial banking, I know only the mortgage of my house. Of developing banking, I do not know anything. So I will not speak about any technical aspect about developing banks. This is the siesta time, so I'm going to all the blood is digesting now, so it's far from the brain. So I'm going to keep awake, and I hope I will not wake you up. Javier told me that I will take a little bit more time so you can sleep quietly. I would first like to talk about the non-existence, or at least the lack of importance of the lack of relevance of Latin America. I'm going to dwell a little bit on some cultural aspects that could help us to define some geographical aspects and some feelings of low self-esteem that we have. And sometimes it's disguised as arrogance, excessive humility or courtesy, or on the contrary, aggressiveness and resentment. Also, I will talk briefly why do we have a lack of true story, a credible fiction or invention that will represent us before the global world and before ourselves. Something to avoid feeling non-existence or despised, or as they say in Mexico, ignored or ninguneados, treated as we were nobody. Let's see. More than a half a century ago, in 1969, there was a difficult meeting between the Valdez, the Prime Minister, or no, I'm sorry, correction of this, Minister of Foreign Relations, and the Council of National Security of President Nixon, Mr. Kissinger. Valdez, in a meeting, said to Nixon two truths. that for the Latin American countries it was very difficult. Two truths that were not stated by the Latin American countries, and that is that it's very difficult to make business with the U.S. considering the disparity, the economic disparity between that country and Latin America. For each dollar of help, the south of the continent returned $3.8 to the U.S. in different ways. Nixon felt really mad with these words. It's like if a servant will have raised the voice. And he asked Kissinger to really call the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Chile. He did it next day. Kissinger stated to Valdez during a private lunch, "Mr. Minister, you made a strange speech. You come here speaking of Latin America, but this is not important. Nothing important can come from the South. History has never been produced in the South. The axis of history starts in Moscow, goes to Bonn, crosses over to Washington, and then goes to Tokyo. What happens in the South is of no importance. You are wasting your time." So nothing happens in the South. Valdez told that he just said, "Mr. Kissinger, you know nothing about us, you know nothing about the South." And Kissinger answered, "No, and I don't care." Valdez, feeling insulted, he said, "You are a German Wagnerian. You are a very arrogant man. You are a very arrogant man." So this Jew of German origin, who really seems to have some Wagnerian, not long ago, at 98 years old, after Putin and the Wagner Group invaded Ukraine in early 2022, he held in Davos a position that is defined by others as a realistic and geopolitically valid. Basically, that Ukraine was in the area of Russian influence, and both Ukraine and the Baltic countries were in an area of strategic interest to Russia. He did not say it, but he was saying that the south of Russia, Ukraine, is like the south of the United States, an important southern countries subordinate to one or another power, that they should not rebel against the great northern empires, be it Russia, China, United States. He did not recommend Kissinger that Ukraine will be defeated, but part of the land should be given to Russia. In year 23, Kissinger has corrected his initial view, but that vision was so curious that Latin American leftists in Argentina, Chile, Venezuela, Cuba, and Mexico, and here in Colombia, they just quote him when they look at the crimes that are being committed in Ukraine by Putin, by the Wagner Group, and by the Russian army. It is rare. The understanding Kissinger for Russia is being quoted by the left, extreme left in Latin America, and the extreme right in Europe. It's the world all the way around. But let's go, I will tell you why I'm involved in Ukraine. But let's go back to the meeting with Valdez in the south of the world. The Minister Valdez was correct in his answers, but I would have said something else to Mr. Kissinger. First, that statistically, look at the map. They should locate the equatorial line that is in the south of Colombia, just in Leticia and in the Amazon line. That's the equatorial line. First, statistically, it's obvious that the North has more history than in the South. The In the Northern Hemisphere, you have 68% of the global territory and 90% of the population. But it is false that in the South, nothing important happened. To start, it was in the South, and specifically in the South of Africa, in Tanzania, where in that area where we had Homo sapiens. All of us, even the ancestors of the Wagnerian Mr. Kissinger, come from Homo sapiens. That should be enough. I mean, to never leave aside the importance of the southern hemisphere in the earth. All of us, you and I, we are South Africans. At the end, Kissinger was also taking care of the South, and it was demonstrated sometime later when he wrongly talked to Minister Valdez. Kissinger, with the support of CIA, did what was, up to the impossible, so Allende will not go into office in 1970, but he was able to Pinochet to have a coup d'etat in 1973. As of that moment on, he provided a great support to the killer Pinochet. Even though the South was not writing the history, Kissinger thought that as Ukraine was geopolitically Russian, Chile, even if its territory was not important, would go up to the southern cone, up to the Patagonia, should be under the control and influence of the United States. The independence of several Latin American countries was not real. It was not real at that time, as well as the independence of Ukraine and many other nations in the influence area of the old Russian Empire. It was not real. There was no democratic self-determination, even if they were wrong. If the democratic countries do not learn how to make mistakes, and I think that we need to make mistakes and to learn how to make mistakes, and I think that in Colombia, we are wrong. We made a mistake, an election mistake, but it doesn't matter, because if we do not learn how to make mistakes, we cannot correct them. That is the lesson of the liberal European democracy. This is what I believe. They have been wrong and they have corrected many times. Kissinger was opposed to what he called the South without importance. And maybe probably for him it will start in Mexico, that in these countries we will be ruled by the free vote and the democratic liberal system. He said, I do not see how we can look without doing anything, because a country becomes communist because of the lack of responsibility of its people. This is what, when he defended, he said that he was supporting the military coup against Allende. We cannot forget that at this time we are here in Cartagena in the northern hemisphere. So in the northern hemisphere of the world. So being from the north, we can speak out loud as if we care, looking at the eyes without a complex to anyone. Mexico, Central America, Venezuela, Colombia, half of the Latin American population is in the northern hemisphere. It's silly, but it's like this. But in Kissinger's imagination, maybe in the one of many of us, I believe that we think that, for example, Morocco is the south of the world, or that the south is in Mexico, and they do not remember that Mexico is in North America, as well as most of Africa. As you can see in the previous map, most of Africa is located in the northern hemisphere. Central America and part of South America is in the northern hemisphere. Even if we call it South America, it's clearly there in the map. And it's unpleasant to talk about South. The words are important, and the poets, they know that not only the words are important, but the sound is important. North, norte, nord. That sounds as no, the territory of no, no, no. and the south, sur, sud, sub. It sounds like subordinated, subdeveloped, so you have to have a rebellion, as women have been able to achieve that human beings are equal. It doesn't matter the sex. So the world should be equal. It doesn't matter if the cardinal points will not defend us, will not define us. It is normal that some of you, especially the visitors from other continents, do not have a clear idea about what is Latin America. It's not your fault. It's our fault. We do not have either a clear idea about what is to be Latin Americans. Borges said that to be Colombian is an act of faith. Are we south? Are we north? Are we east? Are we west? Or nothing, or the half of it? We are the periphery of the West. We can consider ourselves Western. Latin America is in the northern hemisphere and in the southern hemisphere. Some of their most advanced countries are in the south, Uruguay and Chile, and some of the most unequal ones are in the north, Nicaragua, Venezuela. It is not enough to be in the north to be important, or to be in the south not to be important, or not to be able to provide humanity lessons. And to the mankind, ask New Zealand, the country that better handled the pandemic in the world. Let's go now to what I said at the beginning, a cultural aspect, a cultural issue. Like the original scene, I believe that many of our sad emotions start in the Latin part of the New World. This expression of sad emotions was used not long ago. The sociologist Mauricio Garcia, he took it from Spinoza, the kindest of all philosophers, Jew and Flemish. I recommend the book of Garcia, The All Uneasiness of the New World. This scene, as all the scenes, was in reality good and pleasant. It gave us some problems, but also advantages. I will say more advantages than issues. The conquest and colonization of Iberoamerica was different to the colonization and conquest of the British Dutch here in this area of the world, as well as in Africa, Asia, or India. It is a truth. It bothers, but it's true. Spaniards that didn't believe themselves European, and not long ago they said that Europe starts at the Pyrenean Mountains. For centuries they were used to live with the Jews, Arabs, and North Africans. They were more prone to be mixed with other people. There was no taboo of having sex, or the prohibition of having sex with another color, with another ethnical origin. They were not Protestant or Puritan, such as in the Flemish area or in England. The kings of Spain recommended men that went to the Indies to get together with the women that were found there, but that was forbidden by law, but the written law in the Anglo-Saxon environment, and up to the last century. Iberic colonization was quite promiscuous. And there is more. The best strategy that the African slaves could have in Latin America is try to find an indigenous wife or a white wife, because the son of Indians could not be slaved, or the children of a black woman and a white man. That started very soon. At the conquest descriptions, we find once and again the offering of the original peoples that were defeated in battle for peace with these strange, bad-smelling people. They were surprised that the Indians were taking a bath every day, and that was considered not healthy, and it was sinful. When they were coming and they were losing in the battle because of technical issues, the indigenous people were offering to have a peace, and they were offering the gold and silver jewelry. They were offering the chocolate and honey with vanilla and something that was not known in the old world. And besides, they were given girls and women. And these conquistadores were receiving these with joy. They were distributing them, sometimes shared. Hernán Cortés had a son with a translator, the Malitzi or Malinche, a woman without which the conquest of Mexico would have not been possible or would have taken more years. The first writer in America, the Inca Garcilaso de la Vega, was the son of a Inca princess with a captain of the conquerant army, and he was never ashamed of his father or his mother. That's where we come from, Latin Americans, in Uruguay, in Brazil, also with some Japanese grafts, like in Peru, in the Greater Antilles, in Central America, and Colombia and Venezuela. It's an antique human tradition that it's done maybe because of desire, but because of the war. We have historical records of the conquest wars, for example, from the Sabinas and the Latium, where the Latin word comes. The Trojan invaders will kill the male and will remain with women. This is horrible, but from our point of view today, it's depicable. But that it was like this not long ago. Latin Americans, we are the most recent example and the best documented example and the best registered example. We are the sons of something that Baudelaire could have said, of that we come from the rapist and the person that was raped, of the seducer and the seduced, the winner and the woman given as a battle trophy, of the one betrayed and the people that it's delivered to the conqueror, and the invader that believes that what he believes is more valuable, the tongue and the religion, or the language and the religion, and supposedly the wealthier. I once in Spain, I explained my Spanish friends that I am a bastard, and probably the descendant of a guy that left his legitimate wife in Europe, but he got together with a new woman in the new world. I am not a sad bastard or a resented bastard, but a person that without shame, that had no shame, a person that doesn't want to go against a grandmother, or that to deny our mixed origin is to be blind, and it's silly. For centuries, the conservative people in Latin America, that it's been getting whiter because of well-calculated marriages according to the skin color of the bride and groom, the most prestigious color in the world, or those that study in the old world, the white was considered superior. They were being more white, and because of the money that has made people whiter. But the conservatives are considered themselves Hispanic. Some are more Spaniards than the Spanish here in Latin America. But this is a pendulum that go around in the late years, especially in the North American world, in the U.S. world, where the decolonial thought vogue is triumphing. We are all indigenous, and we have the ancestral values of the originary people. If you do not believe in this New Testament, you can be depictable and you belong to the establishment. This is both lies. The conservatives that believe themselves Spaniards, and the indigenous that believe that we are just indigenous people or coming from Indian descent, trying to create a story. I mean, not the ones defending the Spaniards or the indigenous. We are or one or the other, and we have to accept it. We need to conciliate it. We need to take the best of each side, and we should feel proud of the three fundamental heritage: indigenous, Spaniards, and African, that arrived later, but it arrived with the slaves, and the eastern one that has a lot of participation, especially in Brazil, in Peru, and in other areas of Latin America. And they did not come with the slavery, but with poverty, and because of the hunger in Asia. We do not have pure people anywhere in the world. To think about the purity, there is just racism, and to think that during the colony time there was nothing valuable, that is also silly. I feel a defender of the establishment in different areas. I prefer the Western medicine than the alternative medicine. It doesn't matter where it comes from. I do not like the German homeopathy or the Amazon chamanes, at least for severe diseases, or Chinese acupuncture. I am of the establishment in the vaccination, heart prosthesis, antibiotics, and if it wasn't because of the Western medicine, I would have died 2 or 3 times. I had a heart surgery, vesicle, eyes, and tibia, and prostate. I mean, we should not go on. And so let's go back to the different definition of Latin America. We are Ibero-Americans. The Latin ones was invented by France. It was invented by France not to exclude this continent, the Francophone countries or the French-speaking countries. We are indigenous, black, white, Asian, mix, or what? You do not know, and probably we are just starting to understand it, and even based in genetic studies and very simple ones, that they know that our genes, we find the past of all the people of the planet Earth. In the ancestor tests that are sold in internet, males in Latin America, we realize that mitochondrial Eva arrived to America 10,000 or 14,000 years ago, crossing the Bering Strait from Mongolia, or crossing the Pacific from remote islands. And the most male ancestor should be from Spain or Portugal or Africa. What is the language we speak? We can say that clearly. Besides hundreds of indigenous languages, we speak Spanish, Portuguese, French, English, and some Creole and Papiamento, especially Western languages, with some important influence from indigenous and African languages. If half of us are from the north, why do we believe that we are from the south? If a good part of our political and economic traditions are Western, why do we believe that we are against the West? A high percentage of our genes that varies according to the people, we are indigenous. Why do we believe ourselves that we are white? If another percentage of our genes are black, why do we believe that we are from Indian descent? If some of us are white, if some of us, if we were in the US, that are obsessed with the race, just one blood of black blood, we are black. So if we have a percentage of white, why they believe that we are black? Our first difficulty is to keep living in a territory of non-definition. What we are or what we believe that we are, we do not live in a serene and safe way. We live in a conflictive way, or blaming with some complex or some remorse. And we have the duty of getting rid of these sad emotions mentioned by my friend Garcia. We have a bastard and blend origin, much better. We are the summary of the whole earth. Colombia, geographically, it is. It's a summary of the world. If you had time, you could see the following in my country: a piece of Arabia in the Guajira desert, with a lot of Turkish that we sell, the last name, and some mosques. And this is 3 hours from here. We are the Amazon forest, of course. The only thing that we have been talking about, the planet lung that have been affected by cattle and food agriculture for animals. I am making a parenthesis here because we talk about these, about the Amazon, because you are in charge of these earth lung. I would suggest, I would say that what could be done in the Amazon area is nothing, absolutely nothing, to leave it alone, not to let mining get in. Not to let the mining get in, not to get the cattle raisers or the agricultures, or not to build roads, not to let anyone. When the Amazon area was very preserved was the war, because nobody dared to go there. One of the good things that we had the long war with the FARC was because the Amazon was better care in this area of the world. To leave it as it is. The best is to leave it in the hands of the originary people, because in the way they have been taken care for more than 10,000 years. The best way, the best thing for the Amazon is not to change, nobody to get in. And I'm a conservative there. We have to preserve it. Let's keep on with the summary of the world. We have the wetlands of some areas of India. We have Swiss alpine landscapes, because the tropical Andes are green, wet, cold, and our mountains, high mountains that look like Swiss mountains, even though they have a spring the whole year round. This is a year, as a poet said, in that area where the green has all the colors. We are a coffee growing area. We have the ecosystem in the Paramus doesn't exist anywhere but just here in the north of Ecuador and in Venezuela. We have African prairies with rivers full of hippopotamus imported by a drug trafficker. Here they reproduce more than in Africa. For good things and for bad things. In our cities, we have a part of Berlin and Bangladesh. Get away from Cartagena. 15 minutes from here, you can go to an African city in the periphery. You want to go to Africa, you have to go not too far. Maybe you can go to, if you go to a population that is called Palenque, and it's not far from here. All these happy blend will teach us something, that you can live with being happy or you can be sad. Instead of living in this pendulum of believing ourselves Spaniards, and now with the studies that we have a colonized mind that is not capable of thinking by itself, and to decide what aspects from the West should be adopted and what should not be adopted. The same thing we should think about indigenous traditions, Asian or Africans. Beware, not everything that comes from our ancestors, because of the fact of coming from the ancestors, must be defended and adopted as valuable. It depends. That could be a social game. Look at the traditions and to see if we have to adopt it or not. To adopt the music and the rhythms of the African dances, yes, without the music and the African rhythm, there will be not the good Colombian music. There's nothing more beautiful than that music imported and voluntarily from Africa. The indigenous justice with these magic rituals and things that are taken to the river, children that are in the river for to be drowned, the clitoris removal of some indigenous and African peoples, I mean the castration of the Muslims and there is no unanimity in the medical opinion, so I have doubts with respect to that. The Italians castrati to improve singing in the Catholic temples. I do not think that ancestral tradition should be relived, because even though if we do not have Il Bel Canto anymore, the burning of these witches at the Inquisition court, you can see the tortures here in this museum. We have the sacrifice of the young woman taking the heart with the hand so the sun will be out. I prefer Galileo Galilei, even if it was white and Italian. Indigenous quinina for paludism, wonderful. Hammock, especially for making love. I mean, the ones that know the coca tea for Bolivians for soroche, great solution. The cocaine invented by Swiss or German chemist. No, it's harmful. What is better, the wheat bread or the oriental rice or corn arepa? The best is the world with the three things, with rice, corn, and wheat, and for everyone. Monarchic autocracy with the Zipa managing the muscas or leading the muscas. It's better the Greek or English or French or North American democracy. It's very nice, the potatoes for the Spanish, like European eggs and Peruvian potatoes. The politics should be as wise as the cooking. Things are not good or bad. It depends on the origin. They are good when they operate in each side. To conclude, I would like to share the last idea, a last geographic idea. A curious Latin American feature is the some indifference for the borders. We do not mind the borders. We do not take care. We do not fear any foreign invasion. Usually the countries take care of their borders, not the Latin Americans. We do not have like a century without wars, and we should be proud. We do not invade, and we are not afraid of being invaded. Brazil is not going to invade Paraguay. Venezuela is not going to invade Colombia. Colombia is not going to invade Panama. Mexico is not going to invade Guatemala. We are characterized by internal violence, but also international peace. I was in Ukraine not long ago, and I had the tragic experience to have a Russian Iskander missile less than 10 meters from me. And in that criminal attack, my Ukrainian colleague, Victoria Melina, was wounded, and she died after returning from that beautiful invaded European country destroyed by Russians. I have been feeling in Medellin in a oasis, a perfume. Medellin, the famous city of drug dealers and violence, a paramilitary, compared to Kramatorsk in Ukraine, it's a peace paradise. For that reason, I can say that with respect to international peace, Latin America is an example. while in Europe, Asia, or Africa, they were fighting to define their international borders in the previous century, even today. Latin American countries, we have been coexisting pacifically for more than 1 century. The last international war of Colombia was the war with Peru. I think total in that war, we had 178 fatalities. Compare it with the French war in Algeria, more than 1 million dead. But in spite of all of that, taking more time that I have been allocated, I have to say that we still are missing a story, a fiction that will say clearly what is Latin America. An amazing story, a truthful fiction, an invention that will be for all, or at least for many of us. I will tell you that the melting pot is not in the US. The actual melting pot, with the exception of Obama, or everything is a mix of different tones of white, different tones of indigenous or African. Here, friends, as a Colombian sociologist said, we are all a white coffee color, some with more coffee and the other ones with more milk. And it's better, it's better to have a coffee with milk than just milk. It's better even than the coffee itself. So the coffee is good, the milk is good, and the coffee with milk is good. You have to select whatever you like more. Your task, investment bankers, is to help the development in the most adequate topics, the best selected one. Ours is to build a fiction that can summarize us. Your task is very difficult. The task of the writers, it is not easier. Just Gabriel Garcia Marquez in Colombia, in the central part of America, Juan Rulfo in the north, and Jorge Luis Borges in the south have been able to achieve it partially. What I have been telling you, I have learned reading to them. Now you can wake up.
Bueno, agradezco a Héctor Abad Faciolince por compartir su visión.
I want to thank Abad Faciolince for sharing his view of Colombia. Now I invite Shamir Ahmad, who will be sharing this conversation with the panel members. Ana Maria Ibanez, Vice President of Sectors and Knowledge of the IDB, Jean Leon, Executive Director of the Bank of Development of the Caribbean, Natalia Diaz, Director of the Capital Market and Sustainable Funding of the National Bank of Development, Economic and Social Development, Ricardo Murillo Felix, Vice President of the European Investment Bank, and Christian Asinelli, Vice President of Strategic Programming of CAV. So please come to the podium, to the scenario.
Muchas gracias a todos. Voy a cambiar.
Thank you very much. I'm going to switch into English.
Thank you, and thanks as well to Héctor Abad for that thoughtful and thought-provoking talk. I want to thank our hosts and the organizers for the invitation to moderate this important panel It's an honor and a challenge in equal measure to attempt to do so following such weighty reflections from our keynote. Thankfully, it's not just me up here. I'm joined by a superb cast of experts, all senior representatives of key development banks, and all focused in one way or other on Latin America and the Caribbean. So we'll shift now from the realm of ideas to the more mundane, practical world, and specifically to the question of what can be done ultimately to improve the lives of individuals in the part of the world that we know as Latin America and the Caribbean, a region that encompasses, as we were just reminded, both northern and southern hemispheres. There's a great deal of momentum coming into this conference, as we've heard already on this morning's panel, for not only increased collaboration among development finance institutions, but also new approaches to mobilizing public and private capital to address the dual climate and development challenges facing the world today. But what's clear, especially here in the Western Hemisphere, in Latin America and the Caribbean, is that the region is still a long way from fulfilling sustainable development goals by the end of the decade. And indeed, on the current trajectory, the targets are likely to be missed. The aim of this panel, as set out by the organizers, is for us to focus on effective approaches for public development banks to make substantial positive impacts on the lives and livelihoods of the population. And in this case, we're focusing on how to improve the lot of 665 million people that dwell in the region that we call Latin America and the Caribbean. The goal we've been set for this panel is to set a perspective for the future of the region and propose a framework for public development banks to help develop solutions to achieve such visions as catalysts. In the course of our discussion today, we'll reflect on some of the mega trends that are redefining the work of development finance institutions, just as they are financial markets more generally. The climate crisis on the one hand, and rapid technological change, digitalization, artificial intelligence, and other developments on the other. It's worth mentioning here, as we all know, that July was the hottest July on record. And meanwhile, Latin America's two biggest economies have been in something of reverse gear when it comes to the environment in recent years, with Mexico doubling down on fossil fuels, and with Brazil still reeling from the extent of deforestation. So we understand well that the change also needs to come from the top down. But we're going to start now with a broader reflection on the longer-term vision for the region's development. So I'm going to ask each of our panelists to reflect a little bit on the vision for the region, where we expect Latin America and the Caribbean to be over this time period by 2050, given how far behind the region is today, especially on meeting sustainable development goals in this decade. So the question really is, what is realistic, desirable, and achievable expectation for the region, both in contrast with other emerging regions relative to the industrialized world over the next quarter century, given where we stand today, especially in the face of the climate crisis, but also given emerging opportunities, as we mentioned, given technological advances at hand. So I'd like to start by turning the floor to our panelists. I'd like to start with Ana Maria, if I may, to ask you to reflect a little bit on this vision for the region over the next 2 decades, and within that, just to talk a little bit about the challenges and opportunities that you see. Each of our panelists will have 3 minutes for opening remarks on that question, and then we're going to go to specific questions for each of you. Ana Maria.
Thank you. And first, let me give you a warm welcome today to our conference. It has been a huge success so far, and we are very pleased to have you all here. I would say that Latin America and the Caribbean has immense challenges to reach really a sustainable economic growth and a dynamic economic growth. And I would like to mention three specific ones. The first one is that we are a region with high poverty levels that increased significantly during the pandemic and are very high inequality. The region is, with sub-Saharan Africa, the most unequal regions in the world. And if we really want to lift millions of people out of poverty, we need to do a decisive and a very forceful state policy and investments in the region. What do we need to do? We need to increase human capital, expand education, but expand education with quality and to reduce inequality in the access of education. The second thing that is very important for our region is to expand all our social services. We need to expand education, but we also need to expand health and expand it again with quality. We have done so during the last years and during the last decades, but it has not been enough, and we are not very efficient or very effective in that respect. Secondly, Latin America and the Caribbean is one of the most vulnerable regions to climate change. And we need to step up our actions related to climate change. We have to do mitigation, that is important, but we also need to do adaptation. And we don't know yet very well which are going to be the costs of climate change, but if we look, for example, at what are the costs of natural disasters, for example, in the Caribbean, we lose each year 3.6% of the GDP of the Caribbean countries on average. So we do need to invest on adaptation to be able to prepare for climate change, but we have also opportunities. And the opportunities that we have is that Latin America and the Caribbean has the inputs that are needed, for example, for the transition and the energy transition. We have rare minerals, we have wind, and we have water, and we have sun. So we can play a very important role in climate change mitigation as well. Third, and I think this is one of the main problems that we have in Latin America and the Caribbean, is that we don't have a dynamic growth. We have been growing at very anemic levels. The economic growth in our region is not really so good. We did so a little bit during the commodities boom, but our economic growth is not sufficient to leverage the resources that we need to lift millions of people out of poverty, to reduce inequality, and to invest, for example, in infrastructure and social services. So we need to increase productivity, we need to improve the regulations and the policies that we have in the region in order to be able to be much more dynamic and to grow at the levels that we need to develop. And I will leave it there, Taimur, and then we can go into more specific details.
Thank you, Ana Maria. I will ask the same question to you, Natalia, from the Brazilian perspective, but just reflecting on that set of challenges. Of course, these are general themes to which Brazil is not immune. But if you could just take 3 minutes to give us your thoughts.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you, Finance in Common, for organizing this important debate and conference to discuss the role of public development banks and how we can advance the SDG agenda. Well, I think that just thinking broadly about Latin America, we know that we have several problems, and Ana Maria has pointed out many of them. But basically, I mean, we have persistent structural problems like low productivity, subdued investment in infrastructure, inequality, poverty, and so on and so forth. I think that we are all very good at stressing the problems, but not as good at to look at the qualities and the opportunities that we have in the region. So I would like to highlight a few of them. So we have 40% of the biodiversity in the world, 10% of the coral reefs, 12% of mangrove forests. We have one of the cleanest energy matrix in the world. We are a very big producers of food and food products. And all of those comparative advantages need to be turned into competitive advantages. And the tricky question is how we are going to do that. I think if we think about climate change and all the challenges that we have ahead of us, we can see that as I said, challenges or opportunities. And I see this as a great opportunity for Latin America to rethink how we see ourselves, to go back to the opening speech by Hector, and how we want to position the region for the future that is ahead of us. I think that we need to realize that there are certain things that we need to do, improving the regulatory framework, investing in social infrastructure, health, as Ana Maria pointed out, but also I think that we need to have a seat on the table and discuss how the flows, the financial flows, are going to different regions. And if you take climate finance specifically, it's not only about a matter of scaling up the size of finance, but it's how we are distributing that. Only 25% of all the flows are being directed to low and middle income countries, and only 6% to Latin America. So this again is an equation that that's the whole purpose of the financing common, how we can accelerate the agenda, how we can scale up financing, and how can we have a more even distribution of the resources that are needed to take the road into this new paradigm, which would be the low carbon economy. So we'll stop there and then I will comment a little bit more on Brazil. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Natalia. And of course, the green transition and the opportunities that presents for the region, I think is a very important topic that we're going to come to, hopefully time permitting, in a little bit more detail. But Christian, let's come to you with your thoughts.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias a todos.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. When I was going up the scenario, I didn't know if I felt as a bureaucrat or as a banker after the conference of Hector that was inspiring for everyone. I don't think that nobody fell asleep. Why? Because I think global challenges that you presented recently and that we have before us are quite complex, multicultural, and make these challenges to be larger. And between the conference of Hector and your question, there is one point. As an officer of an international organization, together with my colleagues of CAF that are here present, and as an institution, we have to think on how to evolve before these challenges, climate change, poverty, and the ODS, the SDGs, the Agenda 2030. And there are three main aspects. Hector, I think that you have waken up from the siesta, fortunately. The first one is the level of awareness that we need to have. We are not doing what is required to make the changes that are needed. We have to look ourselves at the mirror and then say, we are not doing enough. Not because we cannot do it or it's because we lack time. If we don't work together with international organization, with our own positions individually and collective, and make a change on consumption patterns, these change that you presented cannot be achieved. And how do we link, how do we connect those that are here seated in coordination? We had a meeting today with the president, and we talk about this, and he talked about this magic word. If we don't coordinate, it is impossible to achieve the objectives that are set forward. In Latin America, the Caribbean, we have water. 30% of the water is here, but we have a serious problem of water distribution. And this is the main challenge, funding. How do we fund? Which are the works that are needed to strike a difference and to have an impact? And there is a topic of flooding, of fires, of drought, and casualties. This is the worst situation, but we have economic losses as well. This happens and will happen. The other challenge is planning of this financing. If we don't plan the right time, then we'll not be able to know about this effort that we can make here. The Caribbean Bank, the IDB, the BND, SCAF, and all the other organizations that are here today We know that all the efforts that are being made are not enough for the changes needed globally to be able to achieve these challenges of 2050. These meetings are key, but if we go into actions, this is just a space for reflection to see where we are, to meet with friends, to see where we want to go forward, but we have to start taking action. And Pepe Mujica, you have heard him, he talks about time. He says time is the most valuable thing that we have. Help us to buy with money the ticket that we bought to be here, the hotel, the tour, if you take a tour, the food. But time, if we don't use time wisely, then this is a problem. And today we are here, we left our families, we left the office, and we are here today. We should take advantage of time to be able to take a qualitative leap.
What I think is a fundamental point about what needs to be done to seize the moment and seize the opportunity moving forward. Ricardo, I'd like to come to you for your initial reflections.
Gostava de começar por agradecer a todos y a organização do trabalho. Me gustaría mucho agradecer al equipo de Banco Oldex por todo su...
I want to thank the team for this, the organization of this event.
Well, you ask where we'll be in 2050. I guess we don't have any doubts where we want to be in 2050. The question is how we get from where we are to 2050. And though we all know and we have a lot of ambition and we know where we want to be, we are totally out of track in SDGs. And we need to put our efforts together and coordinate. As Christian said very clearly, coordination is of the essence. When we look at what are the key trends that you put forward, I think that you have two key parallel trends. One is climate. We'll continue to see climate change impacts affecting our countries, our economies. This impact is disproportionate. It will be much stronger and visible and harmful in Central and in the Caribbean and Central America than in South America. In South America, it will affect mostly through the capacity of production in the sectors related, in particular with agriculture, and we need to address this by, of course, mitigation. We need to continue on mitigation. 90% of the investment that is being done is in mitigation. But you have adaptation. And to address the challenges faced by Central and the Caribbean, Central America and the Caribbean, we need to do much more in adaptation, and this is much more challenging. This is involve a better coordination among public entities, between public financing entities, public development banks and governments, and of course, bringing private sectors to the blending and making projects that are not bankable to become bankable. That's our role as public financial institutions, is to create this bankability by sharing risks. The other trend is, of course, digital and all this brand new, brave world of digital. And the two worlds interact. First, because the climate change response needs technology, and technology is key for energy efficiency, for optimization on how we use energy, while at the same time digital and the brave brand new world of artificial intelligence will require more and more cables and data centers that are very energy consuming and must be supplied by green energy. We need to make these two components work together and create a virtuous circle. This creates, of course, challenges, not only in terms of the technologies, but on the adoption of technologies. It's not just about creating the next big thing. It's about disseminating and making these technologies available in the north of Europe, in the south of Europe, in Latin America, in the United States, all over the world. If you want a global transition, we need to disseminate technologies globally. And this puts a big challenge. Challenge in terms of education, as Ana Maria correctly and very well pointed out. Education will be the supply that we need to produce the more scarce resource we'll have in the future. It's called brains that think. Oil will become abundant, will become a liability, not an asset. The same will happen with natural gas. But the capacity of human being to develop the technology that will allow us to make this transition is scarce. We need to invest more in education so that we have the capacity across the globe. Let me conclude to tell that in terms of sectors, I think Europe and the IB as the EU bank, we are providing a response. We are fully committed to the Global Gateway Initiative. This Global Gateway Initiative goes through connectivity across the world. That goes from connectivity in the energy sector, yes, in telecom, but more than that, connectivity that goes through the health sector so that we have a global production of a public good that is medicines and medical equipment, but also goes through global education so that such that we can produce this brain that is the key factor for the future. So I'll terminate my first intervention here, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Ricardo. Last but not least, Jean, I'd like to come to you to reflect on the challenges, but also if I could ask you to consider a little bit the role of institutions such as your own, such as the development banks that are represented here, and to reflect a little bit on how multilateral development banks, public development banks, can be both climate and development banks.
Thank you. So I think we can indicate that the multilateral development banks have a role to play in creating the future that we are talking about in 2050. And so if I can fast forward that, the question is, what might that future look like? Which is really the question you ask. And I want to use 2 minutes to just take you down a little journey, which says you are halfway there to attaining what we want to call resilient prosperity. Prosperity where we have a common humanity with equitable treatment that allows you to share and allocate resources in a way that promotes sustainable livelihoods for all people. So what does that translate to? We are now in a position where every child that is of tertiary education age is a graduate, producing the innovation that we are talking about that can solve your food security problems because they have mastered the art of cloning and recreating seeds to withstand the rigors of the higher temperatures coming out of climate that can assure we have food. We have the ability to move, travel, totally 100% green, no longer using fossil fuels. We have clean oceans that allow for the very coral reefs to regenerate, oceans that allow the fish to be able to breed again the way they ought to. And we have the means of really making the blue economy one of prosperity. We have the ability to talk about we've reduced non-communicable diseases by 50%. We can say we've built homes that can withstand the rigors of any hurricane that may come by 2050. Now, if we think of this as the future, that people will want to say this is a place they want to call home, then the question is, how can MDBs do that? And because we talk about promoting holistic development, where people are at the center, and we see it in its social, environmental, economic, financial, institutional space, then I think the role for MDBs is what policies, how much, how do you allocate to be able to take us to that dream that if you were to write the history and read the newspaper in 2050, 2051, the things I talked about a little while ago is what you would see in your headlines.
Thank you for that journey and that reflection for what could be, and also for giving us at least an indication of what should change. If I could stick with you, Jean, just to answer the question that you posed, and then we'll take it to the panel. Like, what does the adequate response look like today from multilateral development banks, from development institutions, to be able to realize the vision that you're talking about in 25 years?
I think it calls for three things. The first is we need to have a shift in the way we look at development. So it's an entire paradigm shift away from focusing on economic growth to focusing on a genuinely wider definition of development that captures all of the elements, economic, financial, institutional, social, environmental, and promote it in the sense that all policies that you do, whether it's in the allocation of resources, in the allocation of development assistance, in the allocation of capacity building, technical assistance, is aimed at meeting that new definition, one. Two, we need to be able to mobilize adequate finance to be able to provide affordable means to generate all of the investments we are talking about that will get us to that particular point. And the third, we need to build partnerships that will allow us, as we are speaking this morning, to promote the capacity building across countries that would enable us to be in that particular space. And I can see no other way of promoting that but thinking of the entire region, from Mexico down through Central America, all the way down to Chile. What if we had one area that spoke 4 languages fluently, could communicate and undertake business fluently, and can use a single digital space to promote all that we need to do, and we could facilitate trade, north, south, east, and west. We could make this the center of the universe.
Thank you, Jean. And clearly, some of those tasks are more easily achievable than others, and certainly a new definition for development is arguably the hardest challenge to achieve, to get a more expansive and inclusive understanding of development beyond.
We have 27 years.
Sorry, we have 27 years. Fair point. But I want to hear the rest of the panel's thoughts on, I think, very interesting points raised by Jean. Christian.
Sí, la verdad que lo que dijo Jean
is very interesting. As Jean said, he has really been at the core of the future of development banks, and to have this approach in the future. When we read the headlines, these development banks were an innovation on the 20th century, were a tool to have developments. This topic of prosperity put us at a higher level, and to be able to reach this prosperity with the development banks, we have to reinvent ourselves. If we don't do things differently, then we'll continue doing the same thing and having the same results. And then we go back to what we mentioned at the beginning. The impact will not be reached. The real impact will not be reached if we don't reinvent ourselves. I would like to add something to what Jean said, is that we need to have clear in these areas something that is well known in political science: the principal and the agent. In some cases, at the bank institutions, we make mistakes. We believe that we are the main, the principal, but we should be rather the agent for development of the countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. If we have all the points that Jean mentioned, we have clearly who is the agent in this relation, who is the main actor. If we can reinvent ourselves, but not just in words, but rather reinventing ourselves, being the voice of our countries in these international meetings. Ana Maria mentioned transition, poverty. We want to say that energy transition has to be a fair energy transition in Latin America and the Caribbean. We have resources in many countries of the region that, if we use them right, not only could help in this transition, can help us to leave poverty, which is a challenge that we have in our development banks. And finally, we need to emphasize the gap closing. We don't close the economical, social gap, then whatever we do here will not have much sense.
Ricardo, maybe we could come to you to get your thoughts on that, and also specifically to get your reflection on the mobilization of private finance for sustainable development. And no institutions have better tools than MDBs, but yet they're still falling short. So what more needs to be done on that front?
Thank you very much. Well, first, let me start by saying that it's a bit of reaction to what Christian said. In the following sense, MDBs are very clear, are strong institutions, and the strength of MDBs comes from two essential factors: patience and risk-sharing capacity. And that's what makes us strong. That will not change, because that's our genesis. So the fact that we have very patient shareholders and robust balance sheets is the key for us to deliver. What we need to do, as Christian said, is to deliver it differently and address the issues and the problems that are facing us over the next 23 years that are fundamentally different from those that we've faced back in the 70s or in the 80s. This is totally different. It's a brand new world. It's not anymore just about building public infrastructures. It's about bringing together public and private. How to do this and that was a question. Well, essentially, we need to have robust balance sheets, a strong support from our shareholders, such that our quality of our balance sheet capacity allow us to share risks with the private sector. That's how you leverage the resources, by going to private sector and find projects that private sector says, well, this is a nice project. It might even be bankable, but it's too risky for me. So we can share the risk such that the residual risk is acceptable for the private sector, and that we can do projects that private sector by itself will not do. That's part of the discussion that we're having about the capital adequacy framework. Each of the institutions is giving their own response, and as MDBs, we are all different. So what is missing in one MDB is not exactly what is missing in the other. For instance, when it comes to use third-party mandates, the IBA uses intensively third-party mandates by the European Commission. But that's part of our genetic. That's the role of the EU bank to boost the resources from the EU budget, and we already do it. And of course, that other institutions that doesn't have a budget behind, of course, they have a different type of approach. Then, when it comes to the region, the challenges are different across the region, and we need to adapt responses. How can we, or what are we doing to make new responses? First, we are mainstreaming climate disaster clauses in our contracts to face the more frequent and more prevalent across the globe climate disasters. It's not anymore something that just happens sometimes in the Caribbean. So over the last months, you have severe floods in the center of Europe, so in Austria. And just now, it's happening in Spain. 2 people died in Spain as a result of large floods. So it's a global problem, a real global problem, and we need to address this. Very long-term financing may help, because some countries are quite indebted, and having long-term finance makes the impact in their debt sustainability more amenable and better to accommodate. And we are launching the Global Green Bonds Initiative. And this Global Green Bond Initiative, it's about creating green bond markets outside EU. In EU, now we have a green bond market. The IB was the first to issue the green bond. We expanded the market, but we need to move it at a global scale and in a dimension that allows private sector to invest, to trust the green bonds, to trust that what is green, and that we don't have 25 shades of green. We need to have a clear visibility on what is green. And that's part of what we can bring to bring more private money and private resources. If you allow me just To conclude on what Jean put forward, I think this shift from growth to development is, in my view, and maybe you disagree, Jean, I think it's about looking at global value chains and think about global value chains and have a fair share of the value. It's not just about producing, as somebody referred to, Latin America is very rich in terms of critical raw materials. Yes, but we need not only to extract here the critical raw materials, we need to do refinery and maybe produce the batteries and maybe produce more. Because there's no reason to go around the globe with rocks that to refine them in some part, then transport the lithium to do the batteries in another part. We need to make this more efficient and leave value across the globe such that we move from maximization of growth to have a better growth. When it comes to partnerships, I think we share objectives. I think we cooperate a lot, but we need more to share the pipelines, to finance together, to effectively, and let me conclude by saying that, to move from discussing in common to effective financing common. Thanks.
Thank you, Ricardo. Natalia, I'll come to you in a moment to reflect a little bit on the question of the appropriate role for development banks, state development banks, BNDES in the case of Brazil. But first, I want to ask you, Ana Maria, to pick up on what Jean said and what Ricardo and Christian referenced with respect to rethinking our understanding of development, right, over a longer-term horizon, dispensing with the primacy of growth as the kind of North Star for our understanding of where things should head.
Well, I think Jean, Ricardo, and Christian have been very eloquent, but just let me add some additional things. We development banks have the capacity to help the countries to develop and to achieve their goals, but the ultimate decisions and responsibility lies in the countries itself. So what do we need to do as development banks? I think we have several strengths. The first one is that we can help countries to mobilize resources and to mobilize resources through the several mechanisms that Ricardo, for example, was mentioning, to doing debt swaps for nature, to de-risking through loan contingent financing for climate change and this type of things. We also can provide technical assistance to do difficult projects that are difficult to fund. There are a host of projects that private banks can fund, but we come in when the projects are difficult to do, difficult to design, difficult to implement, difficult to execute and to evaluate. And here the banks will provide all the technical assistance and the knowledge and expertise that we have to help the countries to move ahead with these projects. The third thing that I believe it's very important from our banks and from the IDB side, we give a huge emphasis on that, is the knowledge that we provide to the countries. And we do it in conjunction with the countries to help them identify which are the development challenges that they are facing and which are the sectoral challenges that they are facing, to understand what works and what doesn't work when we are investing. And this is very important to be effective in the decisions and in the projects that we do. And thirdly, we are honest brokers. We can sit in the table together, for example, the development banks, but especially we can sit together with all the countries to discuss difficult issues, and we can act as honest brokers. So I think those are the strengths, general strengths that we have. And I think Christian, Jean, and Ricardo have already mentioned some additional ones, so I just wanted to complement that.
Thank you so much, Ana Maria, for that insight. And we'll come to you, Natalia, on the question of the role of development banks, and in particular BNDES in Brazil. The bank in recent years had cut back substantially on lending in favor of playing more of a catalytic role and in encouraging and supporting the mobilization of private capital in Brazil. The volume of lending by the bank is now expected to increase, which would of course mean a bigger role for the state in the provision of capital and in financing projects. What's the appropriate balance in your view?
Well, I think that we are reviewing that strategy right now. If you look at the metrics of BNDES, we have excess capital. Our capital ratio is 34%. Our delinquency ratios is 0.01%, which doesn't seem to be the best allocation of resources for a public development bank that has so big challenges to in Brazil, as we say. So what we are trying to do is to rebalance that, to go back to historical levels. BNDES has historically accounted for 2% of the Brazilian GDP in terms of disbursement. There has been a peak of 4%. That's not the intention, but just going back to the average of 2% of GDP. More important than the size is really which are the segments that we would like to foster. And as most of the people know, I mean, Brazil has a huge infrastructure gap, 2.6% of GDP. So infrastructure will continue to be the core business of the bank, and we will continue to foster that. Energy transition, decarbonization, helping Brazil to reindustrialize. Brazil is one of the economies that has lost most complexity from the industry over the past few years. So we feel that we don't want to be another exporter of commodity like hydrogen, but we just want to develop the whole production chain in Brazil, taking advantage of the clean energy matrix that we have in the country. And also, we have been gradually shifting to supporting more SMEs. SMEs, they account for the bulk of the Brazilian GDP. We are not that good at doing that, so we will continue to support and discuss alternative ways to continue supporting them. But also, I think that we need to be innovative in the way that we allocate capital, because we still have this mindset of just funding and holding to maturity of the positions that we have. And although we need to do that in order to be back to the historical levels, I think that we need to think a lot on how we can crowd in the private sector, where are the gaps that we see in the market, and how can we use innovative financing to foster development in Brazil. And one very good example that we did last year, we did the first public call for a blended finance call in Brazil, where we committed our own concessional resources, 90 billion reais, and we were able to raise 1.5 billion reais in different business segments using different instruments, just in social economy, in urban mobility, and development of a circular economy. So these are the type of mindset that we need to have, just to see how we can collaborate more, not only with private financing, with the concessional funding to advance that agenda. We are also investing our own capital to accelerate startups, impact the startups, and also we have now in Brazil launched a VC fund to accelerate growth, to provide growth capital to impact the startups. So these are the types of things that we are thinking ahead of us. In addition to strengthen our capability of structuring projects that can be auctioned to the private sector to attract investment to the private sector. So I think that in a nutshell, I mean, the amount of money and capital that is needed to take the economy to the level that we are all dreaming here is a lot. There is a space for public and private, and the role of a national bank is really to define which are the spaces, how we can de-risk the projects to bring in the private capital. That's how we are seeing and how we would like to take BNDES to the next years ahead.
Thank you very much, Natalia. We're very close to having to wrap up the panel. We started late, of course. We're going to take a couple of more minutes just to hear closing reflections from each panelist. I'm going to ask you to keep it very brief and maybe just a suggestion to think if we have this conversation a year from now, we're sitting all together, how ideally you would like the conversation to have evolved a year from now, 5 years from now. We'll start from you, with you, Christian, and just brief 30 seconds each, and then we'll wrap up. Christian.
30 segundos, tomo un concepto entonces.
So I'm going to take a concept from Ricardo. He said that we all here, our institutions are different, but as he was saying, they are supplementary as well. So in that difference, we can supplement each other in order to have a coordinated action, as Jean was saying, in a more organized manner. We can really strike a difference. I did it in 30 seconds.
I think coordination, being bold, having an ambition, and thinking specifically about Latin America to develop regional solutions. I think that if we can work cooperatively as a region, being bold and being ambitious, we will get there.
Thank you. Ana Maria.
Thank you. I would like to see in 1 year that we are able to cooperate and coordinate, to be able to mobilize resources for the region for climate change, for adaptation, for financial inclusion, and something that we haven't mentioned here, gender equality. That would be great. We can do that.
Thank you, Ana Maria.
Thank you very much. Essentially, that in 1 year we'll not be regretting that we are saying the same as we are saying today. I think that in 1 year I expect that we have done more, we have worked together, we have shared pipelines, we have more projects in common, and of course, mainstreaming a number of topics and objectives that we need, and in particular, gender equality and respect for indigenous communities, and in all the projects address the issue of inequality, which is a key issue in this region. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Jean.
From my side, the spirit of fix has improved so that we genuinely are able to say we are coordinating and working together at one level. Second, that we are integrating different parts of what we do. So a project becomes an education, an agricultural, an environmental project all in one. That we are using the AI-related trend that we are talking about to help blend all of those together in real time so that our decisions are much stronger than they were 2-3 years past.
Thank you very much, and thank you all. We'll just say that we've obviously heard a rich and varied range of perspectives, but not that varied. I think the common ground is more evident than the variety from all of you, from leading development finance experts working in the region. We've obviously heard about the urgency of the now, an urgency that's exacerbated, as I think everyone has remarked, by the fact that the region, on the one hand, has fallen behind on a number of key indicators, especially when it comes to achieving the SDGs. But also the urgency, as you've all remarked, on seizing the opportunity of coordination on the one hand, but also of what is, on one view, a once-in-a-generation opportunity to reform and revitalize economies. Of course, it's not just down to multilateral development banks, it's also about coordination with governments and the private sector to do so. But the opportunity is there, given some of the mega trends that we've touched on, reshaping the global economy, something that we haven't talked about, but of course the shifting in manufacturing and global supply chains, but also, as we did touch on, the region's position of global primacy, at least in theory, when it comes to the green transition. And also the opportunity, as you've all remarked, arising from widespread digitalization and the advent of AI. It's clear that public development banks can be a catalyst in the process, provided that their operating models evolve and keep pace with the challenges of our time. And a key part of that has to do, as we've talked about, and crowding in private capital. And I think part of the answer has to be in ensuring closer dialogue between public sector institutions and private financial institutions, the broader ecosystem of global capital markets and the key players within them, to make sure that the discussions on capital mobilization aren't happening in parallel, effectively with the public sector in one room and the private sector in another, but that they're happening jointly in the same spirit. I think this summit is a great start. And we look forward to advancing on this discussion at the next one. I'd like to ask you all to join me in thanking our panelists for a superb discussion. Thank you.
Bueno, agradezco a Taylor.
I want to thank Tamer and all the participants of this plenary session on the valuable contributions about the questions and possible solutions in order to set a more equitable and sustainable horizon for Latin America and the Caribbean. We want to thank our audience that are with us here and those following this broadcasting or streaming. Now I invite you to have a 15-minute coffee break to recharge energies and to keep working around these conversations with your colleagues. On the way back, you can connect in the different sessions that will take place, like panel 2, to maximize the impact, taking advantage of the Public Development Bank and the group for the impact assessment, for the roundtable for zero net support to a new generation.
I just walk for your trail and I'm losing your mind and I'm losing your head. Let me take on some love cause I'm a patient. I just want to be high and back to you. Back to you. I just walk for your trail.